All right, what have we got here? We've got Wasting Time by the Malgills. I hope I didn't butcher that, Malgills. Thanks for the copyright strike that's forthcoming, YouTube. Yeah, a lot of people are probably trying to find good excuses to waste time these days, don't you think? It strikes me that may be the case. Wait for the chorus, but before that, let's, in the interim, episode 44, April 16th, 2020. I'm going to open with. There it is. All right. Nature doesn't care. Nature just doesn't care. Nature isn't. You can't anthropomorphize nature. Nature doesn't care about you. And that might seem harsh. But strictly speaking, nature does not care about anyone or anything except passing genes into the next generation. We know this if we studied evolution. It was Darwin's great achievement to explain the adaptation of organisms without appeals to God's design or mystical idealism. Darwinian evolution is true. Mountains of evidence. But it's also a cold metaphysics. The biologist Stephen Jay Gould described it as a cold bath view of nature, not warm and fuzzy in the way religion characterizes nature. And there is a big distinction here. We anthropomorphize COVID because it gives us something to identify that we're fighting against. But COVID isn't a thing. It's just a virus that is doing what evolutionary things do. It's trying to survive and replicate, just like we are. Right, but we're special, hey? Or maybe not. It's a very profound thing. This is a very good book what's his name? The Selfish Gene by Dawkins. I highly recommend it. Highly recommend The Selfish Gene by Dawkins. If you haven't read it and you're interested whatsoever in Darwinian evolution and its implications and the reality of Darwinian evolution, which isn't necessarily understood that well by the layperson, then I highly recommend The Selfish Gene by Dawkins. Mythopoetic is a word that is related to this, which is why it's the word of the day. I'm trying to tie the words of the day into the themes that are discussed. This is how you say it.
Mythopoetic.
It's relating to the making of myth or myths. Relating to the making of myth or myths. Movement for men that uses activities such as storytelling and poetry reading as a means of self-understanding. So we have these narratives about COVID. We have these narratives about how we're at war with COVID, how COVID is evil. COVID's not a thing. It's just like a 23,000 base pair fragment of RNA. It happens to do fucking nasty things. Pardon my français. That is the thought of the day. That's the commentary. Nature doesn't care. Quote of the day. In a late-night phone call late in March, Dr. Kim pitched his idea to Governor Baker, pointing to data from Wuhan, China, that showed that social distancing alone could not bring the virus's spread rate low enough to lift restrictions. When people say you can't do that, it's too labor-intensive, it makes no sense to me. Ask all the people sheltering in place, the 70% of people who have lost income. I would ask those people, how much is it worth to us to really get on top of it? Is it 100 billion? Is it 500 billion? The U.S. government pledged $2 trillion within the first tranche of their support. And what young Kim is talking about here, who's used to be the president of the World Bank, and now is co-founder of Partners in Health, which I assume is some kind of not-for-profit NGO thing. Haven't looked it up. That's its title. Is that we ought to be willing to do anything. He's talking about contact tracing. Okay, he's talking about contact tracing. He's saying if sheltering in place and social distancing weren't enough in South Korea, which is the place where this was the most successful. Singapore were kicking ass, and then they had to shut the entire country down because a new wave came. This has already gone down. This is history. This is how vexing this thing is. We spend something like, second quote, we spend something like $700 billion a year to protect us against military threats. That's the U.S. military budget. Yeah, let's call it an even trillion. at least $750 billion, nearly, we are at greater risk from a biological threat at this time, at this moment, than any military threat. And so should we not be prepared to spend at least $100 billion a year? That's what it would cost to test everybody every 2 weeks in the entire United States. And that's a proposal, by the way. So this is from Paul Romer, a Nobel-winning economist. He put forth, and given the resources don't exist, the volume doesn't exist, but from a pure dollars point of view, if the U.S. invested $100 billion a year, they could test every single citizen on a rolling basis every 2 weeks. That might ferret out the disease. At least we'd know. And of course, you still have to quarantine and contact trace for that to work. Speaking of which, segue to contact tracing. There is an example of this in America. I believe it's Massachusetts. There are people on phones. There are people texting. They're actually doing contact tracing. That has to happen in every municipality or every state, every county. There have to be all of these unemployed folks. They should be contact tracers, or a large number of them should be, and they should be paid, and it should be part of the stimulus. Don't give people $1,200 checks, Trump. Give people a job, which is to contact trace. There's another good article in the Times. I'm happy to share any of these links. I ought to probably do that increasingly in the notes to the video. But a generation of children left behind. There's some concern that with school closures, that kids are losing a year. It might be a little bit hyperbolic to say a generation of children left behind at this point. But if this goes on for 2 or 3 years, that might be the case. It's not like the United States doesn't already suffer from a tremendous difficulty in educating effectively. There's a lot to be said about that, but they've certainly fallen behind globally. There's another article about how skipping human trials in the context of generating vaccines can be a really big mistake, very, very dangerous. So we're racing with the 20 candidates, which I went through, or at least I listed in a recent post or a recent video. Some people have already been injected. It's at least 12 to 18 months away. And in a sad but true tale of woe, I learned in a article that there is a prospect here that indeed, let's wait for it, does the pandemic have a purpose? That's the quote about Darwinian evolution. Polar bears may have to be this one polar bear may be the only surviving creature in a German zoo. They're going to feed the other animals to each other because they don't have the money for the food and they don't have any revenue. This is a real story. Can you imagine? I mean, it's not like unnatural, I suppose, in a sense, but for some reason this polar bear makes it. I guess one animal has to survive the others, right? It's going to be the polar bear. I'm dead serious about this. The polar bear would be the last to go. Check it out. All right, what else? Talked about the song. Who's wasting time? Lots of people are wasting time. Check out this picture of Lachlan wearing my Bose headphones because I was at a loss for other hearing protection at the Monster Truck Show. I almost bought tickets to the Monster Truck Show as a throwback, as a let's do it again activity. It would have been like last month, I think, or this month. I think it was later this year. The Monster Jam. It's a riot. I love the Monster Jam. I love the loud, crazy madness of it all, the redneck madness. Ain't happening this year, unfortunately. I have no COVID positive life changer of the day today, but I promise you that they will be coming down the pipe. I love you guys. I appreciate you listening to these, and I look forward to talking to each of you soon.